got my mic on. We'll go ahead and call to order today's Amherst County Service Authority Board meeting. Today is January 21st, 2025. The time now is 5 p.m. First item we have is a call to order. Did that. Next thing we have is citizen concerns and comments.
And no one has signed up, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
All right, I don't see anybody in the crowd, so moving on. Next item we have is the approval of the agenda. Board, is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Turner. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. I said It works. Next item we have is a presentation. I'll turn it over to you, Director, and
Okay.
you can lead us in.
And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tom Frederick with Pannoni Engineering. Tom and I have known each other for quite a long time, actually. We worked together in the Water and Wastewater Authorities Association in the past. They made a presentation on doing an infrastructure master plan and were selected through our process. And I want to turn it over to Tom to tell you all about the report, the draft report that I had given everybody.
All right. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Wade, thank you.
You might want to make sure you're speaking into the mic because you are live streaming.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to see if I can pull this up just a little bit closer so that I walk out of here with my neck intact. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I thank the authority for having confidence in our firm to analyze a number of pieces of information on the water and sewer system here and what the growth might be and what the future needs of the authority are to make sure that you're providing adequate service to your customers. We do appreciate that confidence, and I have put together a presentation that summarizes the report. It really just hits the highlights, but if you have questions as I go through it, we'll keep this informal, and if you have questions, just pop in and ask your question. If it's part of a later presentation, I'll tell you that, but otherwise I'll just try to stop and take your question and help you understand where we're coming from so that I know that you're in a position that is very valuable to this community where you're having to make very important decisions, and I hope that what I present to you will be helpful to you in exercising that responsibility. Start out, the first slide is just to talk about, hit the highlights of the things that our report covers, and you can see there's quite a few items here. The first one down here was to convert AutoCAD mapping that was provided to us for this study, convert it to GIS, basically digitize it in a GIS layer, 2 layers, one for water system and one for sewer system, both to be compatible with the GIS system that Amherst County makes available to you for land, area, property issues, and streets and roads and natural resource protection areas. We did inspect back in March of 2024. We inspected the vertical assets of your system. The vertical assets include your sewer lift stations and pump stations, include your packaged treatment plants. On the water side includes your tanks, includes the water plant, includes the reservoir, Graham Creek Reservoir, and then also you have a booster pump station where you're able to provide on an emergency basis water to the town of Amherst, or through a pressure reducing valve they can treat. Maybe it's the other way around. I think it's reversed. You're providing them water through pressure reduction, and they're providing you water when in an emergency through pumping. So we've covered all of that. And then for the underground assets, your staff provided us information on what's underground, and we put that information, of course, into GIS and then into a hydraulic model where we can actually, once it's calibrated properly, we can run, there's 2 models, one's for the water distribution system, one's for the sewer collection system. We can run those models and simulate current conditions, and then we can look at some what-if questions. So we can ask, well, what if you do this? What if this happens? What if this growth happens. And that's the beauty of having a hydraulic model. We will provide you the data files from both of the models. The models run on software that's provided by Bentley Systems. You will have to obtain a license from Bentley in order to be able to operate it, but that's because of the software company's rules, not our rules. But we'll provide you the files. And we can provide you updated assistance if you ever need it in helping to keep your model updated, because it's important. One thing I can pretty well guarantee you, because it's true with every master plan, whatever we have forecasted in the way of growth, the reality is going to be something a little bit different, because none of us can totally predict the future with certainty. And so therefore, having a model that you can update as conditions maybe are a little different from what might be reflected in this report, it becomes makes your master plan a living and breathing document where you can accelerate or decelerate projects based on what's actually happening in real time. So we do provide some information on growth forecast. I'll share it with you in just a moment. And then we can run the model to simulate conditions. I'm going to introduce something that's in our report called a level of service, and that's like a benchmark. Everything that we looked at in terms of how well your systems are operated and what needs to be improved is benchmarked against a level of service, which is basically what you are providing to your customers and the services that you provide therein. Then once we've compared the operating conditions that we simulate, particularly the future conditions, against your level of service, then we can come up with what is deficient. We develop alternatives to address those deficiencies, analyze, come up with recommendations, come up with cost estimates, and then that forms the capital improvements, which hopefully feeds your capital improvement program and your process that you're getting ready to undertake. So that's the process that we went through in the master planning. And then the benchmark. We call it in the report a level of service. The way that we do it, it includes multiple things. I've read a number of other master plan reports from other firms that mostly focus on engineering standards. Those are necessary, and we include those in here, but we also include a few other things, including your service interruptions and response, because that feeds the need for resiliency of your system. If you, for example, one of the items in the level of service is that not more than 10% of your customer base would be without water or sewer service at any given moment of time. And so then if we run some resiliency scenarios like water main break, the 12-inch water main coming out of your water plant breaks just on the east side of the T, where the west side goes to Elon, the east side comes to Madison Heights. That's your only water source to get to Madison Heights. So you're going to affect more than 10% of your customer base. So we earmark those things, and then it becomes something that we need to address as a improvement opportunity. Also, your minimum residual pressure, which is going to be an issue in our findings, because we met with your staff at the beginning of the project and decided that we wanted to pursue what is commonly in the industry a 30 PSI standard. The state regulations require a minimum of 20, so that gives you just a little bit of room between what you want to give your customer and what the absolute regulatory minimum is. And there are a couple of issues in your system with that. And then fire flow, and we're going to talk a little bit about fire flow later, because that seemed to be with the water system the biggest area of concern is in your ability to provide fire flow to your customers at different locations. So with that, you see the map that shows your service areas. We did not assume in this report that your service areas would be modified, with one exception. Mr. Castillo asked us to run one scenario with a piece of property that's outside of your current water service area, what it would take to serve that property, and we did introduce that in the report. So let's take on the issue of growth now. And I will say, in going through this report, this was an interesting issue, because I suspect the possibility is you may be at a point where you're going to depart from your historical trends. And at least that's certainly what we heard in our meetings with the county community development folks and meetings with some of you. We look typically at a couple of experts in forecasting population and employment, and those agencies includes the Weldon Cooper Center at the University of Virginia and the Virginia Employment Commission. And what's interesting is Weldon Cooper is predicting you're going to lose population over the next 30 years, starting in the decade we're currently in, with a possible loss of 0.5% of population, but that loss is declining to almost a flat line by 2050. The Virginia Employment Commission is getting out of the business of projecting population and steering more toward their expertise in employment. But we did find a 2017 forecast for Amherst County that included a 0.3% per year growth, which is not a significant amount, but it is on the positive side and does differ from Weldon Cooper's forecast. We also looked at surrounding communities because I think that may play into what you're going to see in the future. For the city of Lynchburg, the growth rate was about 1% a year to be forecast. For Campbell and Bedford counties, historically, they've been growing at about 0.7, so it's 0.68 on this slide, 0.68% per year growth average, which is a higher growth rate than what Madison Heights and Amherst County has historically seen. But in our conversations with the county staff, the plans for a town center, the plans for the redevelopment of the training center, also the county staff strongly believe that some of the negative growth numbers that you've seen in your system in the last few years really reflects more than anything else the closing of the training center. And absent of that, you may be experiencing some growth. So we put all those factors together and we decided to set a target for the master plan at 0.7% per year, which says that now and in the future, your growth is going to be more in line with what we see in Campbell and Bedford counties rather than how you have lagged behind in growth in the past years. You could exceed this target, particularly if the town center concept takes off and the development proposals that are in the hopper now, if they all come through, that alone, and this is an interesting statistic, 64% of your current water demand is tied up in these 6 developments that are on the map on this page. I've mentioned the 2 big ones, the redevelopment of the training center and which is number 1 in the master plan, the town center concept, which is number 2. And then there's some smaller developments here. But if those are all built in the next 5 years to capacity to build out for what's being planned, you would experience a growth in 5 years of 64%. That's a much, much, much bigger number than what you have shown historically. When we were asked to do this master plan, one of the things that was most important to your staff was to be sure and know if the distribution and collection systems can serve these 6 proposed developments. So what we did was we took the selected target growth rate of 0.7% a year and applied it to your treatment capacity, which is your own water treatment plant, your own package sewer treatment plants, and your contract with the city of Lynchburg for wastewater treatment. So we're looking at the capacity of your treatment capability and your supply growing at that rate, and what we discovered from that is that those facilities are adequate for the near and probably the long-term future. And then for the distribution system and the collection system, we put in these current development proposals into the model, ran it again to see if all those developments come through, if you're going to be able to handle the service to those developments. And I'll share with you our results. So that's, does anybody have any questions about how we came up with growth? Again, as I've said, because you may be at a focal point where you're into a change, there's a lot of uncertainty with respect to how you're going to grow, and I hope that what we've done is gives you a good start in understanding how you need to respond in order to be able to maintain that service. So the hydraulic model, once we have calibrated it, meaning it mimics how your actual system operates, as well as can be reasonably determined from the data that you have available to you. Then we can run different types of scenarios. We can look at average day, which average day is just take how much water if you're talking about water, how much water you sell in 365 days and divide that by 365, and that's an average use per day. And then for the peak day, we're looking for the absolute highest demand day of the year, and can you meet those conditions without fire flow, and then we look at also with fire flow. With the average day and the peak day without fire flow scenarios, we found a couple things that were consistent both in the current conditions and in the forecasted future conditions, and that is some low residual pressures. When I say low, I'm talking below 30 psi on a fairly regular basis on the dead ends of your system in the cool well area. And that reflects the topography because the ground elevations are higher in the cool well area than anywhere else in your service area. But we also saw some pressures commonly below 30 psi in and around the vicinity of the Price's Store standpipe. That standpipe is located on high ground along Business Highway 29. And because of that, the pressures are a little bit lower right in that high point. And when your water plant is functioning and running, your pressures are good. Your pressures are above 30 psi at the base of that tank. But when you shut the water plant down, you're starting to feed water out of the tank to supply your system during the hours that you're shut down, which is usually at night. But we do find that particularly if you're operating the system without the water plant for, say, 8 to 10 hours, there's going to be a few areas around that tank where pressures in the system are going to be in and around 25 psi. So that was enough that we flagged that as something that we want to look at a little bit harder. Another feature of your system that is pervasive across all of the scenarios we operated is you have a number of dead-end water mains, which you already know. Some of those are 12-inch. They were designed for future service, and it's understandable why they are sized the way they are because you're going to be extending them. We're planning to extend them in the future. But it does create some very long water ages, and the problem when that water sits in a pipe too long, chlorine residual can diminish. It can fall to zero if you're not flushing and you have very old water, and or the growth of disinfection byproducts, which can then trigger violations of state regulatory requirements. So flushing is important, and we understand that you are flushing the system now, but we did, through the model, give you some suggestions on flushing and what some of the volumes might need to be at various key locations in order to maintain an acceptable water age. And then the last thing, we ran 9 resiliency scenarios, and some of those triggered areas where more than 10% of your service area could be affected. The single transmission main from the water treatment plant in Elon Road was one of them. Service to Elon, which is going the other way from the water treatment plant. Both of these areas are dependent on that sole source, the water treatment plant right now. And then I mentioned I talked about Price's Store already. That tank is very critical. That's the tank that receives the flow first from the water treatment plant. So if there's something goes wrong and that standpipe has to be taken out of service, it does create some concern that you might have even lower pressures in that particular area or if it's a planned maintenance activity, we think it may be important enough to even have a temporary tank at that location. So with that, I purposefully stated my previous conclusions without the fire flow because fire flow is a special issue. And so let's dive into that now. This map, if I can get this slide, there we go. This is a map of your water distribution system. Red dots indicate fire hydrants that flow according to our hydraulic model. The flow at 20 psi is less than 500 gallons a minute. And then the purple dots reflect fire hydrants that will flow greater than 500 gallons per minute, but less than 750. I talk about the two benchmarks, 500 gallons a minute and 750, because Mr. Castillo had told us at the beginning of this work that a long-term goal is to try to get to 750. And certainly if a new development proposal comes in, you're going to review that proposal with the idea of delivering 750 gallons a minute to the hydrants in that new subdivision, but a recognition by the staff at the same time that your water system was not designed, the one you have now that's in the ground, it was not designed to provide 750 gallons a minute to every hydrant. Probably, I don't have a definitive document that says what it was designed to, assuming that there really was a benchmark, but it appears that some of the areas of your system were built and set up, and the pipe sizes were chosen probably more on the basis of 500. So you're planning for the future an upgrade of your fire flow system. We concentrated in our development of alternative capital improvement alternatives. We really focused on the ones that are red here, and you can see there's that's Galt's Mill Road that is east of US 29 bypass, where you see a lot of red hydrants. And then in the right shop zone, near the right shop standpipe, just to the east of Madison Heights, Old Town, is another area. There's one hydrant that's red, maybe hard to see. Way up in Elon, there was one hydrant that turned red, and then there's several hydrants in Elon that are in that purple color. So that's a shot at where you look at from a fire flow perspective. We ran each of these fire flow tests in combination with the maximum day demand. So it's a pretty high stress of your system, and on a low flow date, low demand date, you might actually get more flow from the hydrants than these numbers, but it's designed to work with maximum day. And the hydraulic model is flexible enough that we can test each hydrant separately under that same condition, each of the 300 or so hydrants that you have in your system, and see which ones pass and which ones don't. I've mentioned water age already. In the report, there's a map, and it's also shown on the screen right now, that shows the areas where you have long water ages if you're not flushing water in the system. This is not data from your system. This is taken from the hydraulic model, but which came from data that was downloaded from your AutoCAD files. And you can see a lot of the dead ends are where you have the highest. The red is the highest age that's greater than 10 days. In some cases, it could be 20 or 30 days, and that's really, really, really high for a water system, again, if you're not flushing. And the good news that you can appreciate is that your staff are flushing some of these lines already and aware of the issues. This table on the right, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but this table suggests how much water you would need to flush at the locations that are described in the far left column all of which are larger areas of your system with dead ends, how much water would you have to flush in order to get the water age below 5 days? And over on the far right column, we translated all that data into an average gallons per day. And the total down at the bottom, interestingly, comes to 39,000, 34,000? I need to get a little more eyeballs on the subject here. Excuse me. Yeah, 39,000 gallons per day. And then you have some very small, like 6-inch lines that have dead ends where you might have to flush. So we think on somewhere around 50,000 gallons a day, which is significant. That's about 5% of the water that you treat would need to be flushed from your system in order to maintain adequate water quality and age. So that's a significant issue for you. And then we take a look at some capital improvements from the modeling, which I've mentioned. This first one here is to parallel the 12-inch water line that you have leaving your water treatment plant from the plant to where Elon Road and Windridge Drive intersect. At that point, going further east toward Madison Heights, you have a 12-inch line in Elon Road and a 10-inch line in Windridge Drive. So you have 2 feeds to the Madison Heights area and to the Price's store standpipe. But in that short section between the water plant and that intersection, you only have that one pipe. So if that 12-inch pipe breaks, most of your water system is going to be without service. And that, well, once the tanks drain, it could be without service. So that you would have a limited amount of time to repair anything that might go wrong with that 12-inch line before you started having some very serious residual pressure problems. And if your pressure in your system ever drops below 20 PSI per Virginia Department of Health regulations, you would be asked to issue a boil water notice while testing your system before restoring it. And because I have sat in a chair similar to the chair that Mr. Castillo sits in now, I understand how potentially serious that can be in terms of the confidence people have in your water service. So it's important to keep that pressure going, and it's also important because you don't want to contaminate your system.
Mr. Frederick.
Sure.
Mr. Perro has a question real quick.
It seems to me a lot of people don't understand why a boil water notice would be. I understand the regulations why a boil water notice is required, but would you understand the practical reasons why the VDH requires a boil water notice to go out when your pressures drop that low?
Yeah, when the pressure's below 20 PSI, there's potential that back siphoning or backflow of untreated water, and that could be water that's on the ground, that could be stormwater if it's leaking into a pipe, or it could be coming from a tap, or could be coming from a hydrant or somewhere else where water can backfeed into the system, and that water could be contaminated. The pressure in a water system is what keeps the clean water in the pipe and keeps the contaminants on the outside from coming in.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The second recommendation is related to the Coolwell area. North Coolwell Road, at the end of that pipe, your pressures are below 30 PSI. On the Isaac Walton Road side, that's a 12-inch line. The end of that black line, which is your existing pipe, pressures are actually at about 20 PSI. We even ran a max hour demand in our model that suggested that at the very end of that pipe, pressures could get as low as 18 PSI, and that's a concern. That's a concern that needs to be addressed. So what we're proposing here is a booster pump station on the North Coolwell 12-inch main just east of the railroad crossing. That way the pipe that is connected to that 12 that goes up and feeds the Ebenezer Church area would stay on the 997 pressure from the Faulknerville standpipe. But beyond this pump station, we're going to be pumping into, we're going to be extending the 12-inch main in North Coolwell Road and tying it to the main in Isaac Walton. You see the locations where it says PRV, those are pressure reducing valves, so that if water needs to flow from a future tank in the Coolwell area, which we are suggesting be set at about 1,050 feet above sea level, which is 53 feet higher than your Faulknerville tank and 53 feet higher than your Price's store tank. So it's creating a new higher pressure zone. Water can feed back from that tank through the pressure reducing valves and back to the lower pressure, or the booster pump can kick the pressure up to fill the tank. So that means that this area would be under higher pressure than your current system. It is also possible, you see on this same map, South Coolwell Road, the dead end of that line, pressures are approaching 30 PSI, maybe a little bit less. And our strong recommendation here is that the pipe in South Coolwell Road not be extended further north until the new pressure zone is in place, and then the pressure from the new zone would be feeding the water back to this point. That's because the elevation of the ground is climbing at the end of that line, and you don't have much room to go and maintain 20 PSI pressure. I didn't put that line in South Coolwell Road. We don't think it's necessary as a part of capital improvements necessarily in your capital improvement plan, but I would hope as development, if there's any development pressures along South Coolwell Road, that through the developer you can get an extension of pipe in South Coolwell as well.
Mr. Frederick, could you use your mouse and just show approximately how big the high pressure zone would be? I'm assuming it's only around that tank and doesn't extend down to Isaac Walton.
It runs from here,
Just PRV to PRV?
PRV to PRV, and then I think as you extend service out in this direction, kind of where I'm drawing a circle, so it would come all the way down to here and then back up. So this is kind of going to be roughly where the Coolwell zone is going to be, and it's all based on ground topography, how high the ground is in that area. That dictates where that needs to be.
Does the booster pump and the pressure and the tank, I guess, do they have to be put in at the same time? I'm just thinking about water age and thinking about the tank and how much turnover that tank's going to get. I do like the fact that it is tied in, back in, and could backfill into the Faulkner tank.
You can, couple things that you could do to defer the tank to a later time. Put in variable frequency on your booster pumps. You could also put a small hydropneumatic tank at that booster pump station, so that if there's a sudden, say a hydrant's opened or something sudden happens, then there's pressure against it before the booster pump station can react and kick on. So with those couple things there, I think you could defer the tank to a later time. But I do think as this area grows, you will eventually need that tank. We chose 500,000 gallons. I think an argument could be made to go smaller than that. My own philosophy is get your, especially from a fire flow perspective, get your storage on your high ground, not your low ground, so that when you open a hydrant, you're not dependent on a pump to come on, but you have flow coming from the highest area. So that's just something that my own experience tells me is a good idea. The next one is the fire flow and resiliency in Elon. I mentioned there was one hydrant, it's on Monacan Park Road, that could not make 500 gallons a minute. And it's the distance from the water treatment plant, and also when the water plant shut down, it's the distance from the Price's store standpipe to feed the hydrant. It's a very long run of pipe, so you've got some head loss in that pipe. So by the time it gets to Monacan Park Road, the pressures are falling. We do think this is a long-term improvement. I don't think you need to do this right away, but at some point in the future, especially when you want to address that one hydrant, which is kind of on a high point on that road, you want to consider adding some storage up here. I also include this in the resiliency because at the present time, if the 10-inch main coming from the water plant were to fail, all of Elon is out of service. A tank would provide that resiliency because it could backfeed pressure into the Elon area to give you time to address whatever the concern might be on the 10-inch pipe. And then ultimately to address a number of hydrants in the Elon area that flow just slightly above 500 gallons a minute, but well below 750. A loop with a new 8-inch water main that you see at the bottom of this map would address many of the hydrants in that area and give you a firmer system that meets your future level of service. We did, as I said, we did put this in the long-term improvements. We didn't suggest you have to do this right away, especially if money's an issue. Next, the next issue is the right shop zone. After getting your maps and putting them in the system, we had some conversations with your operations and maintenance team and learned some things about how you operate your current system that were not reflected in the mapping, but they are reflected in our model and reflected in this report. You operate currently what we call 997 because that's the overflow elevation in the tanks, served by the Price's Store standpipe and the Faulknerville standpipe, the 997 zone. The right shop standpipe sits on lower terrain, and its overflow elevation is only I think it's just slightly above 954. So it's 40 some feet lower, which corresponds to close to 20 pounds of pressure drop in that zone. When we looked at all the area within that zone, if we were to raise that to 997, so it would be on the same par with the Price's Store and Faulknerville and give you a wider 997 pressure zone. If we were to do that, no pipe in the right shop area would exceed 150 PSI, which is something we use as a benchmark because 150 class pipe has been a minimal standard in the water industry for a number of years now. So all but your oldest pipes should be able to meet that 150 pounds of pressure. There's a couple of ways to raise the right shop zone. One would be to replace the standpipe with a elevated tank and put that elevated tank with an overflow at or near 997. The other is the scheme that you see on this drawing, which is to put in a booster pump and a series of a check valve and some pressure relief and a altitude valve that would allow the standpipe to sit at a lower elevation, but the surrounding water mains would be at the higher pressure. What's interesting is detailed. It's not detailed on this slide, but it's detailed in the drawings. We show how you operate your system to bring water from Price's Store, lower the pressure going into the right shop standpipe, and then distribute to an area around that standpipe at a lower zone, and how you can raise that to a higher zone. And it's basically valving in the distribution system as well as on the tank site. If you implement this scheme, it's a little bit cheaper than putting in a brand new tank and dismantling really a standpipe that's not more than about 30 years old. So it's got some life left in it. You would be treating that standpipe sort of like a ground storage tank with a booster pump beside it that would boost pressure into the system. So it's a fairly common practice detailed here. This way you would, I mean, I'm not necessarily stating a preference of this system versus putting in an elevated tank. I've been around the industry for a number of years, and I know most operation and maintenance people would prefer the elevated tank because it's very automatic. It responds without the need for mechanical equipment to come on and operate, so it's more reliable. But in this case, it's also more expensive, so I gave you both options. And then your staff asked us when we began this study to look at what's going on with the water mains that were put in by the Commonwealth of Virginia to serve the training center. And we understand that there have been some, at least oral discussions between your staff and the Commonwealth about the possibility of the Amherst County Service Authority taking over those pipes now that the training center is closed, and it makes perfect sense. I can't think of a practical reason why the Commonwealth would want to hold on to a water system with very few customers. And you're in the business of running water systems. They're in the business of doing a number of other things. So I think it's a good win-win opportunity. We assumed that you would be able to obtain their system. We don't know the condition of the pipes in that system, and was not in our scope to do a detailed assessment of the condition. So we assume that it's going to be okay, but you should have a study done to determine the condition before you take the system over, if nothing else, so you know what any deficiencies might need to be and can budget to address them. But the green lines that are on this map basically show that system. There's a line coming from where I've got my cursor right now. This is coming from the city of Lynchburg through the 5th Street Bridge. The pipe's underneath the bridge, and then it's buried above the north abutment, and then turns and runs along the river down where my cursor is now to a booster pump that then feeds two 200,000-gallon elevated tanks. The elevation of the tanks is slightly lower at 870, slightly higher at 872 than the pressure that the city of Lynchburg told us that they can deliver at 864. We wanted to make sure the datum were not different. Datum meaning the reference points, and the 8 feet is not because of two different methods of surveying, but was a real issue. But we did talk to your staff, and your staff did confirm, without operating that low head booster pump that's on this drawing, these two tanks never fill. They go about half full and stop. So that confirms that the city of Lynchburg cannot deliver enough pressure to fill those two tanks. So that pump station is already there and does need to remain in place. But what we did was looked at an opportunity to put a booster pump station at the base of these two tanks and put in a new 12-inch discharge pipe that would tie into a section of 12-inch pipe that you already have in the ground, and then continue where you see the red line up to the Right Shop Road and the Right Shop Zone. This would, once you put this in, and again, this could be a long-term improvement, budget depending, but once you put this in, you have the ability to obtain, we think, close to 1 million gallons a day from the city of Lynchburg should you ever need it. And I've talked a little bit about resiliency and the fact that you have some pipes in your system that are totally reliant upon your water treatment plant running anytime that you need to call upon it for demand. If you had this connection to the city of Lynchburg system, you would have greater resiliency. If you had to take the water plant out for 2 or 3, 4 days, you could operate your system without low residual pressures if you had this improvement made. So we think that this adds a considerable amount of resiliency to you long term. It starts with obtaining the system from the Commonwealth and then building upon it. With that, we think long term, the Old Town Connector, Highway 210, is a good break point looking at your topography between your 997 area and what we're calling the 872 area. And we do think this area down along and near the river, near the James River, it would have very high pressures if we tried in the pipe, if we tried to move that to 997. We think the best way to operate that part of the system is 872. I don't know how much development's going to occur along the Old Town connector because I believe VDOT has some control considering this a limited access highway, but you do have an interchange with Highway 29 to the east, and you have some business development already, and a business park and that sort of development, maybe some commercial development along that exit is certainly an opportunity to the future and should be at the 997 level. So we would go south of Old Town Connector where we would drop to 872 in terms of how you operate your system. So with the improvements we're talking about here, raising the right shop zone, creating a cool well zone, and operating a zone in the training center area, you would be operating 3 pressure zones in the future. And we think that's a good fit for the topography that you have.
Quick question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And by the way, I do like the idea of the resiliency. That's a great benefit. The additional resiliency, it's a great benefit. I do think it's a little longer term, but I love that. Mr. Castillo, could you remind me how the Blue Ridge Regional Facility is fed? Is that on? Do we supply water to them?
Yes, we do, through a 16-inch line.
So there's a 16-inch line going down the Old Town Connector.
No, it's not. There's nothing on the Old Town Connector. It's on Riverview Road. Comes around
Comes the old,
Right shot.
okay, the old route.
the old route.
Okay,
Correct.
all right, thank you.
And, well, since I got a chance here, back to the water aging issues, staff over the years has figured out where the aging issues are, and some will actually have 24, 7-day week, 365 flushing going on to make sure that we are maintaining low disinfection byproducts, and we are well within compliance on all of the disinfection byproduct zones. Your turn.
Okay. With the improvements that we've just recommended, you address several of the fire hydrants that I pointed out earlier were not delivering 500 gallons a minute. There's a couple of exceptions. The Lakeview subdivision has multiple hydrants that do not meet the 500 gallons a minute. We think a new water main to create a loop with 2 feeds into that subdivision is the way to go. So there's a small capital improvement called Lakeview Area Fire Flow Improvements on this map. The other one I'm going to mention from a fire flow perspective is quite complicated and complex, and that's Galt's Mill Road, where multiple hydrants fail to deliver 500 gallons a minute. Our modeler asked the question, how much of a parallel 8-inch pipe, meaning a second pipe parallel to the existing 6 in Galt's Mill Road, how much of an 8-inch pipe would be needed so that all of those hydrants would achieve 500 gallons a minute? And a new parallel pipe would have to go beyond Highway 29, so that means either you would connect it on both ends of the highway so you didn't have to bore a second pipe under the highway, but a substantial amount of 8-inch pipe would need to be run. And once you do that, you create another problem because now you've got all that water sitting stale in a pipe on a highway with very few customers. There's potentially in the very long term, I think it's called Brightswell, is a potential to provide a second feed to Galt's Mill, but that was a couple of miles, and there are very, very few homes on that street now, and it did not feel cost effective. We don't recommend a parallel pipe in Galt's Mill Road because it does create water age issues. I think that's a special case where in the short term, perhaps it's not a good recommendation, but perhaps the best of all worlds, given the complexity of that location, might be just to have a good fire flow plan with the fire agency that's responsible in that area to make sure there is a way to get water in that area if there's ever a fire. That was a tough decision to come up with, but attempting to remedy the shortcomings on Gulfs Mill Road, we couldn't find a good solution that didn't create other problems.
The discussion or the look that you had at the Right Shop Road tank with some modifications as far as a fire plan, could you basically in a fire situation boost the pressure in that line using the higher elevation?
Yes. You would raise the pressure on the pipe in Gulfs Mill Road about 20 PSI. But when we ran it in the model, you
That
still
still
couldn't
didn't cut it.
deliver 500 gallons a minute to the end of that pipe.
Got it. All right, thanks for looking at that.
And we would recommend that you raise that pressure, and that gives you a little bit of additional flow to those hydrants. Okay. Particularly, your staff was interested in the question, is there enough storage in your water system today? And there's an interesting answer to that question. From a regulatory standpoint, the answer is yes, you do have enough storage. VDH has written right into your operating permit what they consider to be storage that is, that can count as real storage. And I have to kind of explain a little bit with a standpipe, because you've got one elevated tank in town in Madison Heights, and then you've got 3 standpipes. Standpipes store water from the bottom to the top, but if you allow the water level in the tank to drop too far, then the pressures in the system surrounding that tank fall below 30 PSI, or can fall even below 20 PSI. So effectively, you've got a tank that maybe is 70 feet tall with water in it, but you can really only use the top 20 or 30 feet, depending on the situation, before your pressures in your system fall too low. So it creates a good bit of dead storage. And so we ran a calculation based on the level of service standard of delivering a minimum of 30 PSI. What's the lowest level each of those tanks water could be at to be compatible with the 30 PSI operating system? And you can see that, for example, the Faulknerville tank holds 650,000 gallons, but only 152,000 gallons is available without creating a low pressure problem somewhere in the vicinity of that tank. And the other tanks similarly. The Littleton Lane elevated tank can go almost to empty, but not quite empty before you have a low pressure in that area. So 213,000 of the 250,000 we consider usable. So that creates what you see in the far right-hand column. The Right Shop standpipe holds 700,000 gallons. Right now, only 98,000 gallons is usable, again, because that tank is at a lower elevation. So it can't drop very much. It has to stay almost completely full all the time. But with the improvements that we recommended, with the ability to treat it as a ground storage tank and pump to a higher pressure, it restores the entire volume of that tank as usable, because it's feeding suction to a pump now rather than feeding the system directly. So that elevates that number of usable storage back to 700,000. And then if you add the additional tanks that we've recommended that I showed you before, one is the acquisition of the 2 tanks at the training center site, adds 400,000. Eventually, when you build the Cool Well tank, it adds another 500,000 gallons, and then the E-line tank. At that point, you have 2.5 million gallons of completely usable storage. And that is sufficient to provide more than a full one-day demand plus fire flow. And that's a conservative way of trying to address if you have enough storage. But the answer to the question is, with the improvements that are recommended in this report, you would have adequate usable storage. A few operating recommendations. that we talked about in the report. We looked at some capital improvement alternatives to address the Price's Store standpipe and the lower pressures in the immediate vicinity of that standpipe. But we did not come up with any solutions that were not significantly costly. And putting in water mains in a very busy highway area would be expensive. So we think probably the best thing there is just to have a hard operating recommendation that you would not allow the water level in that tank to fall below 983 feet. That still gives you 14 feet, which if you turn that over on a daily basis, should give you a water age of about 5 feet, together with mixing the volume of water that's in that tank. Another recommendation is unidirectional flushing, and we do give you a prescription in the report, beginning at the water treatment plant and moving out to the farthest reaches of the water system. We would recommend that on an annual basis. And for those of you who are not familiar with unidirectional flushing, it's pushing water in a pipe one way by opening up hydrants and closing valves, so water can only move through the pipe in one direction, and then really pushing the flow rate above 5 feet per second, which creates a scouring of the wall of the pipe and basically a cleaning of the system. If you do that, we think once a year. We didn't see any indication from talking to your staff that you have severe problems with any water quality concerns that might be related to the pipe wall. So we think once a year is a good place to start. But of course, if you see the need to do it more often in the future, you could. But the starting point would be to do that once per year. I've talked some about water age and a need for flushing, and we've actually given you some figures of flushing at various locations on a gallons per day basis. That needs to be maintained. You will find in reality as you implement it that you need to flush more in the summer than in the winter, so it's not a flush the exact same amount every day necessarily, and that's because the water is more active when the temperature is warmer, which means chlorine residual falls faster and disinfection byproducts can form more readily when the water is warm than when it's cold. So you may not have to flush as much in the winter. And then we recommend mixing in all water storage tanks, and most of your tanks already have mixing systems in it, but that's important to water age. And then advanced metering infrastructure, which I know is something your staff's very interested in already. They're making the right call, in our opinion, in elevating. You have some older meters in your system, and one of the most important things for any water system is make sure your meters are accurate, because that's your cash register. It does a lot of things from an operating standpoint too, and decisions that you make, you're going to make better decisions when you know what's being consumed by the customers. But of course, the most important thing is making sure you collect the revenue that you deserve for the water that you're actually selling. With advanced metering or AMI, it's a cellular-based system. You would have the software. The meters themselves would run on batteries and would talk to the internet through the cloud, or I should maybe say intranet. It's a secured base. There's no World Wide Web site for the meter readings. This would be exclusive and secure. It's secured by your own staff. But in that way, you could poll what someone is using in homes throughout your system on a regular basis, let's say every 15 minutes or 30 minutes, depending on your software and how often you want to do it and how many times you want to go out and change the batteries. But doing that establishes for each customer a pattern of usage that a customer could follow by connecting to your portal. And also, if a customer is willing to give you their address, their email address or phone number for texting, if a meter suddenly shows constant registration all night, and in a typical situation you would expect, especially in a home, that there'd be very, very minimal demand at night. But let's say all of a sudden a home that is, experiencing regular patterns where, there's rarely any consumption at, say, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly there's 10 gallons a minute or 20 gallons a minute flowing constant. That's a good indication that there's probably a leak. And with AMI, you would see that and be able to alert the customer through text. So it boosts your customer service experience significantly, but it also gives you valuable data that you can use to better calculate what your losses are between how much water you're pumping into the system and how much water is being consumed, and get a better handle of what your non-revenue water may be. And you can also use AMI by closing valves and creating zones where only one water main feeds water to a given, let's say, subdivision or business park. You can isolate an area and actually figure out what the water losses are in smaller areas of your system. And what I'm describing that you can do with AMI, you cannot do with manual water meter reading, because you only know, when you're reading a water meter manually, you only know what they're using on the day, from the day that you last read that meter in person to the day you next read that meter. And if that's once every 2 to 3 months, then you don't really know much about what's the usage pattern of that particular customer. So AMI is very advanced technology. It's state-of-the-art, and I think it's a good place that you're planning to go there. So that concludes what I had in this presentation on the water system. Maybe a good chance, if anybody else has any questions, I can pause for a minute.
Board, any questions? Mr. Martin?
Yeah, thank you. So first, I appreciate the study. I think it's very thorough. I was impressed with the
Thank
work
you.
that you've done. Just some general observations, just for discussion back and forth, right? So in your report, you referenced the 6 developments that, a little over, I think it was 5,136 units, right?
Yes, sir.
And earlier in the report, you said we accept, I think it's 2.3 persons per unit. So that would be a growth of about a little over 11,000 people,
Yeah.
right? But then if you equate that back to 0.7%, it would take us 55 years to get there. So I'm just offering that I think the population projections could be low. And we all know what Weldon Cooper projections are. I mean, projections are just projections. So my question is, if we reached the 11,000 new residents in 5-10 years, is our system adequate?
The fortunate answer to your question is yes, sir, it would. It would be adequate.
Good.
I maybe haven't focused enough on the difference between modeling current demands and modeling future demands. But for the water system, for every scenario we operated, whether it's the average day or the maximum day or the fire flow, we modeled future service conditions as putting in all 6 of these developments. So that 11,000 additional people that you're talking about would be consuming water, and your water system, with the improvements we've recommended, will serve those additional customers.
So you didn't base it on 219 people a year. You based it off of including all 11,000.
Yes, sir.
Great.
For the distribution system, we did. Yes, sir.
All right, so fire flow. Let's talk a little bit about fire flow. So 500 gallons per minute, my understanding of NFPA regs is suitable for 1 to 2 family homes, right? Anything above that, you should be looking at 1,000 GPM. I understand our system wasn't designed for that, and typical single-family homes, if we can get 500 gallons per minute, 750 as what we're striving towards, I think that's great. What concerns me is we haven't talked about the 29 business corridor, your Walmarts, your large apartment complexes, our industrial parks, and what type of fire flows that we could get there because if one of those buildings was to, God forbid, catch on fire, 500, 750 gallons per minute isn't gonna be sufficient. Fire apparatus we have in the county now pump 1,500 gallons per minute, right? You're gonna suck the system dry. So I would ask we look a little bit more at those, the Lowe's, the Walmarts, the high fire flow areas, and what we need to look at. And I just have a bunch of questions. I mean, again, I'm very impressed with your study. It's just questions I have. Can't even read my own writing. Total cost. I think you had one slide, it was like 27 million, and now we're up to, and then you went into the water storage stuff, and it was like, had additional cost. Is that in the 27 million, or is that additional?
All the improvements that I outlined for you, the right shop zone, the cool well zone, the 872 zone, all that is in here.
I think it was something about storage, though. If you go a couple slides forward.
The storage is in here as
Oh,
well.
that's in there?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Great. So total cost, if we did everything, is like 27 million.
It'd be higher. 27, 28 plus 6.5, essentially.
You need me to go back there.
Oh,
again?
I'm sorry. Yeah, can you go back to that slide?
So,
Yeah.
separate line item.
Oh, so the short and long, so it's really like 36 million. Okay. Are you going to come out and recommend, and maybe you did it, is that the point of your short and long-term recommendations, is what we should look at immediately compared to longer term? Or, I mean, how would you rank those things on?
We decided not to put hard years in this report, in part because it appears that you're going through a evolution as far as your growth is concerned, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the future. But to give some numbers for reference, short-term might be a 5-year plan. Long-term might be 20 to 30-year plan.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah, something like that.
I got 2 more questions, is that cool? Yeah. Okay. You mentioned, and the fact that you mapped this and modeled all this, I mean, I think that put us years into the future, so that's awesome. Moving forward, you mentioned we'd need the license from Bentley if we want to do that, so don't need it today, but like the cost of that software and then what the training would be, is that something we would do in-house, or is that we'd come back and hire you guys to do? How do we do future modeling if we want to do that?
You mentioned 2 alternatives. You do it yourself or hire someone like us, hopefully us,
I got
to
you.
update it for you. Either one is possible. We maintain a license, and it's a seat license that moves around. Like if we have 5 seats,
I got you.
5 engineers can be using the software at one time for any client. But then we have to check in with each other to make sure that 7 of us aren't trying to use it all at the same time. But we could serve your needs to update your system. Some water systems love to be able to operate the model themselves. The way Bentley operates, if your staff wants to operate it, who are employed by the service authority, they're going to require that the service authority have its own license in
Yeah,
order to operate it.
I get that. I think that's obviously up to you, Mr. Castillo. And then if we add lines, though, obviously those lines would need to be put into the model.
Yes,
right?
sir.
So, okay. Last question, I promise. Daily water loss. The report mentioned it, and Mr. Perry, you've brought this up in the past, I think. Rough numbers, what are we losing about? We can't account for what, 300 and some thousand?
I think
Yeah.
it's roughly 20%.
Yep, just under 20% of the total.
that we
water
don't know, it's not getting billed.
It's not, it's non-billed non-billed
So-
water.
Does that include the
Consumption.
flushing?
That
water?
includes the flushing water, includes fire protect, any fire flows, includes leaks, and also includes slow metering issues as well.
So I guess what I'm getting at is, are you confident that the 20% you can reasonably account for in flushing and fire flows? And I want to make sure, how do we know we don't have some big leaks somewhere that we don't know about?
Staff was doing the water audit, and we will start doing the water audit. We've had a lot of other issues that have been more pressing.
I'm just,
I'm just, to answer your question, we need to start doing a water audit on a regular basis based upon our actual meter reads, so we can actually determine where it is. I looked at the older data. It's an up and down depending on which cycles were being read at the time. Going to an AMI system would really give us a much better handle on that, because we would have the actual data on a regular basis. I know other systems I've been involved with have gone to the AMI, to a automated reader system or a AMI, and we're able to really hone down on their water loss.
and please, I'm not
understand.
pointing fingers, I'm just.
I'm not either.
I think this study has put us in a very good place.
Which is why I
Why
asked
we need it.
you as a board to support doing this.
Yep.
We've invested a lot into this. We've invested a lot of capital into it. We've invested a lot of time. They have invested a lot of their resources into it. So I'm very pleased with the results that we have received from it.
Now, you might just blow the wastewater piece, but the water piece was great, so.
Actually, the wastewater piece, not too bad. There's a few questions that need to be,
All right.
that Tom's going to be
I'm
answering
done.
for me.
Thank you very much. Yep.
Go ahead, sir.
So following up on the non-revenue water question, yes, understand there's always going to be water loss in the system through just process operations, through just small leaks over time, through fire service. But what's standard? What's a benchmark that we should go for?
The American Water Works Association has two numbers that they suggest, that your non-revenue water be 15% or below is for an average or good system. Less than 10% is an excellent system. There are some systems in the country that do achieve, they work hard for it, but they achieve less than 10%. That's a long-term goal for you. I would suggest 15% as a shorter-term goal. I'll throw in that from our calculations on water age, about 5% is going to be consumed on a daily basis if you're flushing your system the way you need to get rid of the older water in your dead ends. So that alone accounts for a quarter of your non-revenue water. I recommend the advanced metering infrastructure that Tim just talked about as well. Get your meters up to current and get them with the latest technology, so you're doing a better job of reading what your customers are actually consuming. One of the big problems with water systems with older meters is they tend to under-register. So it's not really necessarily, you tend to think leak when you see non-revenue water, but it might just be that a whole bunch of meters in your system are not registering as much water as is actually going through that meter. And that's where your leak is going into the home and not being paid for. Not their fault. Your meter's not registering properly. So that would take care of that. AMI also allows you to calculate non-revenue water on a real-time basis. And when you're only reading a customer meter once every couple, 3 months, that's not real time. And that's why Tim was talking about variations in the calculation. If you have a holiday, fall in December, or series of holidays, and your meter readers fall behind a little bit as far as where they typically are during another month, you might have a billing cycle that's 5 days longer than the one before it or the one after it, and it messes up your calculations. And it means that you're really, with the type of meters that you have in the ground now, your calculation of non-revenue water really needs to look at about a year's worth of data before you can really figure out what's going on. And that's what we did in this report to come up with the just short of 20%. I think it's a little bit high. I think you set your goal to drop it down lower. But I've seen water systems that have 25, 30. God forbid we're not New Orleans, Louisiana. Their non-revenue water rate is over 50%. So it can be higher, but it can also be lower.
Any other questions?
Okay, my discussion of wastewater is going to take less time because there were fewer, it's a smaller system, smaller service area. Plus, there are not as many issues to discuss with you. This first slide, a little bit hard to read the slide, but these three tables came directly out of the report. We were asked to evaluate if the wastewater treatment plants, the two package plants, should be rehabilitated and continued to operate in service, or if they should be eliminated by putting a lift station on the site and pumping the wastewater into your primary trunk system. And we did, Pannoni used a sub-consultant to do the wastewater modeling, and they came up with an estimate of about a little bit short of $1.4 million to eliminate those two package plants. But as you can see on the bottom, about 160, 260, 300, a little bit north of $300,000 to rehabilitate the issues that were visually recognized during our inspection of those two treatment facilities, plus our interviews with the operators and the things that they had informed us it might not be visual or might be latent. We did talk to the operators so we would understand completely what was needed to rehabilitate those plants. It is cheaper to continue to operate those treatment plants than it is to eliminate them at this point in time, so that's our recommendation. Wastewater model was established similarly to the water model. It uses a different type of software because with wastewater you have a lot of gravity systems, and they operate under there's a different engineering formula for predicting the behavior of gravity pipes compared to pipes that are under pressure. So the model's a little bit different, but also very similar. But we operated it in the similar way of looking at average day, and also we looked at peak hour flow, and I've got here dry weather. This would be the peak hour of the year when rain is not influencing the flow in the pipe, basically is dry weather. And then there's a wet weather peak we also looked at. We did talk to your staff about any wet weather data that you might have on hand. Obviously, if there's a sanitary sewer overflow, you're required by regulation, if you know about it, to report it to the Department of Environmental Quality within a certain number of days, so we can look at that. But fortunately, over the past 3 years, there were only a couple of reports that you filed, and in both cases, it was a blockage in the pipe. So we don't attribute that to a capacity issue, and that's good news, because capacity issues are much more expensive to address. Although I will say, if you have areas where you have experienced blockages, put that on your hit list as areas that you should inspect and clean more often. Also look for restaurants or other places where grease might be discharged into the system, and make sure and enforce that grease traps are being used in those facilities. Those are the ways to address most blockages are related to grease. They can be vandals or other things, but those are very difficult things to control. But just be active in inspecting your system regularly so you can catch problems as soon as possible. Because we did not have any hard data on how much rainwater might be getting into your sewer pipes during a rain event, we made a global assumption that the wet weather inflow would be 2,000 gallons per day per inch diameter of pipe per mile of pipe. So if you had a mile of 8-inch pipe, the IDM would be 8 times 1 would be in the denominator of that equation. What this means is that we're just assuming that the amount of rainwater getting into the system is the same everywhere in the system. We know that's not true. I've never seen a sewer system that actually, in fact, operated that way. But the only way to know where the vulnerable areas of your system are, where more rainwater is getting in than in other places, the only way to know that is to collect data. And you collect data by putting up rain gauges and also putting flow meters in strategic locations in your piping. There's technology now that even uses sensors in the manhole covers where you sense level of water in certain pipes, and you combine that with flow data, and you can get a pretty good picture. You have to wait till it rains, but when it rains, you get a pretty good picture of what's going on in your system. We do recommend, while we don't see any major issues in your system, and your SSO reports would suggest that you don't have major issues in your sewer system right now related to wet weather, but this is an issue of due diligence. EPA and DEQ are going to want all wastewater systems across the state and the country to be proactive in looking at their systems to catch rainwater inflow and infiltration, because otherwise, as pipes age or get older, flow can actually increase, and then you can create a problem that you might not have had earlier. So it requires a due diligence. So we recommend that you do an inflow and infiltration study separate from this study to better understand how your sewer system is operating under wet weather conditions. Very fortunately, the model did not show, and this surprises me because I don't think I've ever seen this before, that have actually worked for a client where we looked at your wastewater system under average day demands, under peak day, dry weather, under the assumed wet weather conditions, and found that your entire system, all your pipes, have adequate capacity. That's an unusual finding, but that's a good one. Pat yourself on the back for that one. And that also reflects the 6 additional developments. It's going to significantly increase flow in your sewer system if those 6 developments all build out. We looked at that as well, and your sewer system has the capacity to serve those customers. What we did find, and what shapes the capital improvement summary here for the wastewater side, looking at your vertical facilities, and I mentioned at the outset, we visited those, plus we talked to your staff about latent problems that we might not see at a site visit, and came up with costs to address the concerns that we saw. And the concerns varied. In some cases, the site may not have been adequately secured, or the fencing may have been worn somewhere. In some cases, the access roads are very narrow, and it'll be very difficult to get heavier trucks in and out, and the roads may need repaired. And then there's issues with some of the pumps and controls inside the station. Put all that together, and we're looking at short-term recommendations around $600,000 attributed to all the sites that are on this list, and then some additional long-term recommendations over $700,000 in further improvements. I will mention our consultant that did, a sub-consultant who did the sewer evaluation, came up with cost estimates that were construction costs. We typically add 30% at the concept level to account for engineering, financing, legal expenses, and most important, contingency. Because at a concept level, you're coming up with an estimate, but you don't have any design work done yet, so you don't have detailed information for costs. It's more general. So your contingency therefore should probably be a little higher. Some other wastewater recommendations include performing regular drawdown tests for all the pumps at all of your lift stations. This is to determine if the pumps are still pumping where they're supposed to pump and where they were pumping when you bought the pump. Or it could indicate, let's say the pump rate is slowing as determined through a drawdown test. It could mean a number of things, but more likely the impeller's wearing in the pump and may need to be shaped or replaced in order to bring your pumps back up to where they were when they were new. I think it's important to periodically run those tests, and that could be every year or every couple of years, or maybe even longer if you find that there's not much change. Then you could pace those out over a longer period of time. I mentioned the inflow and infiltration study already and the reasons for that. We would suggest you investigate flood risks at your primary Williams Creek pump station. This is the station that pumps all of your wastewater except for the 2 package plants and pumps it across the James River to the Lynchburg Regional Facility. Your operators told us very clearly that floods have occurred in that area that can submerge some of the equipment in that station, and we're particularly concerned about making sure that your mechanical equipment is either designed for submersible or you get it out of the floodplain, particularly the electrical equipment. But that's going to take a separate investigation. We didn't put a cost estimate on this one because it really does need a separate, more detailed investigation. We did put in our cost estimates to add a generator at the Williams Creek pump station. You have dual feed facilities. You have dual feed, meaning 2 different substations provide electrical service. So if one substation fails to deliver power to the pump station, hopefully the other substation is in operation and kicking in. And for normal types of emergencies, that's good enough. But one thing we find repeatedly in this industry is hurricane activity, and we're all in an area in a zone where we're vulnerable to potential for hurricane, as we all well know. Hurricanes tend to knock out multiple substations. If you're relying upon a second substation to run the pumps in your station and both substations are out, your pumps are dead. And that's a big enough station that we would recommend an on-site generator to provide emergency power there. Also, flow meter at Williams Creek Pump Station and perhaps some other key locations in the system. Test your electrical efficiency for your pumping systems and perform a regular program of closed-circuit television inspection of gravity sewer mains and catalog where you have defects and problems and come up with a plan to regularly fix those on a priority basis. And now I move from talking specifically about water distribution or talking specifically about wastewater collection to some more general, and I close this with some more general recommendations that we call management recommendations. The first one here, and you're already well on the way to doing that, is take the maps that we give you in GIS and develop a strong database. And by database, one of the things that GIS does in addition to producing really high-quality mapping is you can tie data to points in the GIS map. So you can have a pipe, you can have a database that says it's a 6-inch pipe, it's ductile iron pipe, it was installed in 1982, or whatever the data might happen to be. For sewer, you could also, you've got manholes in the GIS maps. You can attach data to those manholes, includes what's the invert of the pipe coming in, what's the invert of the pipe going out, what size is the pipe, what type of material is the pipe, what type of manhole is it? Is it a precast concrete manhole? Is it a brick manhole? Those kinds of characteristics you can put in there. And then also you can, we are suggesting you develop an asset management program. And one of the first things you want to do to develop asset management is assign an asset ID to every asset in your system. That's a unique alphanumeric number. And it's not just a matter of assigning an ID in GIS for your assets, but using that same ID in every other management system you operate, whether it's your customer and billing information or your maintenance management. That way you can link the GIS database to other programs where you maintain data, so that you as a board member could ask a question like, could you provide me a map and show me with blue dots all the locations in the sewer system where we've had a repair in the last 5 years? And it would populate that for you. So it aids management decision-making. It also provides an excellent way to store data. And the reason I said you're already well on your way here, Richard Hall called me when we had just delivered the GIS maps to your staff and said, can I use this to for the lead service line inventory that you were required to produce to the Virginia Department of Health? I said, absolutely. In fact, that's the best way. The best way to maintain a database of what types of service lines are in your system, particularly if it's lead or if it's something else like plastic or copper or whatever. The best way to maintain that is in your GIS database. And once you have it there, a GIS database, you can also link it to other files. Like you have, let's say you have record drawings that you have scanned and digitized somewhere and created a file name for it. If it's in an electronic version, you can link to that. Somebody can click on a manhole and suddenly an as-built drawing pops up showing you what that manhole looked like when it was built. So there's just so many opportunities to take advantage of to improve your efficiency, improve your ability to manage data and make good decisions using a GIS database and an asset management program. And then finally, and this is something that we talked about at the kickoff meeting with your staff, would be, as you get the opportunity, a new administration building, we would suggest something on the order of what's typically in our industry called an operations center, where the front area of the building, you would have parking for your customers, you would have a storefront entrance for your customers that would be inviting and would provide for handicapped access and things of that nature for people who visit your facility, whether it's just to pay their bill or whatever the need is for being there. That provides good access, which right now your current administration building doesn't provide good access. It doesn't provide good parking and doesn't provide handicapped capabilities. So it limits how you serve your customers. With the operations building concept, then behind the storefront, where you probably have your customer service and your billing, and up front near your public entrance. Behind that, you could have operations staff, you could have maintenance shops, you could have a place in the back where you could store your utility vehicles that you need to service your system, and you can bring all that into one location. And I believe that is my presentation.
All right, thank you, Mr. Frederick.
You're welcome.
Before I open it, I just want to say thank you for putting this together. The report itself, the plan is very detailed, and like Mr. Martin said, it's going to push us into the future where we need to be. So thank you to everybody at Pannoni Associates. Thank you for working with our staff, with Mr. Castillo and his staff, and the board staff. I do want to go back to one of Mr. Martin's questions. The summary tables you presented for both the water and the wastewater system, those are not prioritized in any order as far as what we should be focusing on. That is correct, right?
We only prioritize short-term versus long-term. The higher priority projects are the short-term.
Right. But they're not in any order per se, correct?
Within the list of short-term, we didn't say this one first,
Yeah.
second, third.
Yeah,
No.
that's what I wanted to clarify.
Correct.
So, okay, thank
But
you.
if that's a question that you have or your staff has, we're happy to discuss that with you. What?
I think I'll lean on Mr. Castillo to work through that and get us the details later, but thank you. With that, board, any questions?
I'm sorry, I didn't see a cost estimate for the AMI?
I'm working on getting that developed right now.
Okay, because you talked about it a lot, but there was no cost estimate for it, so.
I've taken some recent bidding of other communities in our area and then expound on to our actual data. I should have that for you shortly,
Okay, thank you.
particularly as we get into the budgetary time. So I know that there's going to be a large number of budgetary issues we'd like to address and have them all addressed at one time and stroke the pen and be done. But we'll have to make some real decisions.
Any other questions? Mr. Woods?
On the table, on the wastewater, table ES2, so the long-term recommendations are kind of nominal numbers compared to the short-term, or was that just a projection, or I'm just curious, if you're gonna spend $225,000 and go through engineering, why would you not spend the 268?
You could. You could. That was the way CTL Engineering broke it down.
Okay.
Trying to look at what's high priority and what's not. For Amelon, there is a big number. Or, I'm sorry, that's
Right.
Williams Creek.
Right, that's over half of the
Yeah,
long-term,
and that,
right?
yeah, that's correct.
And so I guess the draft, the numbers in my table I guess are a little bit different than these numbers. Look like, I don't know, I guess that may have changed, Tim.
Yeah, when I read through the report, I sent some number of questions to Tom,
Okay.
and this is,
It's not significant.
yeah. Fortunately for our side, on the
Went down.
wastewater side, we're in pretty decent shape, other than we have some antique little package plants that basically putting a good lining system into them will give us
Right.
a good long-term operations.
One more, oh,
I
sorry, go ahead.
appreciate your question, because I didn't say this when I went through this table. We modified this table within the last day. Tim sent us some comments last week, and some of the comments he said, he checked off some of the items that we were recommending you do and say, hey, I've already done it.
Okay.
Between last March, when we looked at the facility, and today,
Yes.
Tim's been busy.
Well,
so he's
I
already
like the
taken
direction
care-
you're heading.
He's taken care of a few things, so he said, you can take these out, they're already done, so we did that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Parra?
Again, thank you for this. I very much enjoyed listening to what you all have done, and I agree completely. This is advancing the ball significantly for the authority. It's going to make us more customer-friendly, more business-friendly, the ability to be more responsive to customers and the county's needs, actually, as well. I thought you highlighted some good importance of coordination with the county and emergency services about water supply, and it will help us able to prioritize development needs, infrastructure needs to support the development, and I thought that Tom's comments about our more densely populated areas and water supply, fire hydrant supply in those areas are very good, and the pointing out the redundancies that I had missed and single sources in certain areas. I think that's really important to do. As we're all aware, we've got a bond that's outstanding that is unspent right now, and I'd be very interested as to how that is going to apply, how we could apply that, or if we choose not to use that. And I'd love to prioritize that discussion. If that can come, if you're planning to align that with the CIP discussions, I don't know if there's a benefit for waiting for the CIP discussions or to advance it now. I'll defer to you to when you'd like to do that, but I would love to get that money committed and put to work for the county or released, one or the other. And last comment is, I'm assuming all these numbers, actually, no, would you please tell me what year these numbers are? Are these today, as of today, are these 2024 numbers?
We
What's the benchmark?
earmarked them was December 2024.
Thank you.
That's as of that date, yes.
And to your comment regarding moving things along, I've just been receiving financial data from the RDA system, going through that, trying to get my head around all of that. Would be putting all that together with RT Taylor, so we have now our needs numbers, we have our finance numbers, put that all together so we can be more holistic with our future planning. Because we do have resources sitting in investments, we have bonds, resources. How do we best balance this for the long term of our customers and our ratepayers? Because that's who's paying for all of this. And you all are aware of that. I'm preaching to the choir. I like that.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
I know you got one. Come on.
so where do we go from here? I mean, I'm really interested in the 29 corridor. I'm also interested in getting this kind of adopted and memorialized, so what's our next steps?
From this, I will be bringing forth a recommendation at our February meeting to adopt this infrastructure master plan with comments being addressed from our meeting here today.
Okay.
And then hopefully have some better ideas of where we are going with our financial master planning as well.
Gotcha. Great work.
Good work. So, with that, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could say one more thing.
Yes, sir.
that-
Go ahead.
That is, I want to thank these two gentlemen and the other staff who were a part of the authority staff who helped us. I mentioned a couple of times that we talked to your maintenance folks. We wanted to make sure we got information we might not otherwise
Yeah.
get from the data. Everyone was very, very cooperative, and I just want to say I appreciate that.
It's not always the case, is it?
Depends on who's in the room, so, thank you. All right. Next item we have is citizen concerns and comments. Seeing no citizens here, we'll move on to matters from members of the Service Authority Board. Mr. Martin? Mr. Woods? Mr. Pugh? Mr. Parra? And I have nothing. With that, take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Martin. All those in favor say aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.